Hello, my friends. My name is Ryan Freeman. Welcome to another book review. Today, I am bringing to you one of the most famous writers of American literature, particularly in the early 20th century. It is a book by none other than Ernest Hemingway. The title of the novel is The Sun Also Rises. This is, I believe, Hemingway's first novel. It is also considered one of his greatest works. It is a story of the lost generation. This was a term coined by Gertrude Stein, also made popularized by F. Scott Fitzgerald. You know who I'm talking about, the guy who wrote Great Gatsby. It was a term, the lost generation, referring to the young people who sort of came of age and spent their early adult life in World War I and just after World War I, where sort of the collapse of a lot of the previous held ideals and notions of what civilization, what society was, the meaning of life. This was also a very turbulent time of change in terms of technology, planes coming into existence, yada, yada, yada. This lost generation, people who no longer had firm foundation. I have heard that the Great War, as it was termed, World War I, was a war that radically shook the foundation of the Western mind, that no longer believed that humanity could be barbaric. The ideas of progress, of both moral progress and progress in society in general, had sort of been shattered by World War I. So this lost generation, many young people, many Americans moved to France. This was also the time of prohibition. So alcohol being illegal in America, you could go to Europe and you could drink alcohol freely. Also, there were a lot of censoring, a lack of freedom to be an artist in America during this time. I'm talking about the 1920s. And if you would go to Paris, France, which is where this story starts off, The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway, you would have more freedom as an artist. So you get the feeling that there are a lot of expats, expatriates, people who are from America who have gone to live in Paris so that they can drink alcohol and they can do their art in freedom. Funny thing about that word expat, expatriate, I am an expatriate because I'm an American who chooses to live in Taiwan. And I first heard this term when I first started traveling abroad, and I thought it was really cool to be an expatriate. I thought it's a really interesting life. But I looked into the etymology, the origin of the word expatriate, and actually originally it wasn't something positive. It was someone who was banished from their homeland. So it's a very interesting thing to be an expatriate, someone who chooses not to live in their home country. And in the beginning of the novel, it does talk about sort of, and actually throughout the novel, the characters are asking people who have come from the States, what's it like? There's even though they have chosen to live in France, in Paris, there is definitely some longing to return home. And I can tell you from my own experience that as cool as it is to live in another country, you are often thinking about home. And perhaps even if you're not consciously thinking about home, part of you is longing for it, at least in my experience. But onto this novel. What is it about? So it is a story of these artists who are in their 20s or 30s. I think most of them are actually in their early 30s. Hemingway published this novel, by the way, in 1926. So I believe all of the events are sort of taking place in the early 20s. I believe he finished writing it in 1925. The publication, I will get to the story, one second, sorry. The publication actually has an interesting thing about it because Hemingway had wanted to publish it with a different publisher than the one that he had signed a contract with. And I read that to get out of his contract with this publisher that he didn't want to publish this book, The Sun Also Rises, he ended up quickly writing a sort of scathing criticism of one of this publisher's most favorite authors, because he had a clause that if that publisher refused to publish any of his novels or any of his books, that he could get out of his contract. So basically what he did was he wrote something that he knew they would refuse by criticizing one of their favorite authors, and by doing that, they rejected this sort of critical, I don't know if it was a novel or a nonfiction or a short story. They rejected his work, and he got out of his contract, was able to publish it with the publisher that he wanted. And it came out in 1906. It was 26. It was dedicated to his wife, I believe at the time, Hadley was her name. I'll talk a little bit more about that. I'm not an expert, by the way, on Hemingway. This is actually this is the first novel of his that I've read. Other than The Old Man and the Sea, which I heard as an audiobook like 15 years ago. And I did read A Movable Feast, which was one of his nonfiction works that he wrote at the end of his life. But this is the first like full novel of Hemingway's that I have read. I've read some of his short stories. I'll talk a little, this might be a sort of a erratic book review going all over the place because I'm trying to sort out my thoughts and I don't want to really miss anything. So anyways, thank you for bearing with me. So the story takes place in Paris, starts off in Paris, and you just have this feeling of these people who are trying to make it as writers. You're getting a taste of their life there. They're playing tennis, they're boxing, they are wining and dining, there's affairs, love affairs, there's all sorts of social maneuvering that is happening. They're having fun. They're actually pursuing pleasure to the utmost. In fact, throughout this entire novel, you do strongly get this sense of people who are pursuing pleasure almost recklessly, destroying friendships, drinking way too much, getting themselves into quite a lot of social problems, both in the community that they're having these parties, as well as within their own interpersonal relationships. It starts off in Paris. I don't want to spoil too much. In the main character, his name is Jake. There's a lot of other significant characters that are with Jake. There's a Jewish guy, Robert Cohn, who is sort of the whipping boy of the group, although he gives some of them a whipping with his fist. He is a champion boxer from Princeton. In fact, he is one of the first characters that is described in the novel in detail about his. I think he's actually the only character where it goes into his past, because he's got this interesting. He's different than Jake and his other friends. Jake and his other friends are Catholics or Protestants. Robert Cohn is a Jew. Even though he's a part of the group, he is always the Jew in their group. I believe a lot of critics have mentioned that Hemingway was possibly anti-Semitic, and I know that this novel is used as an example, although Robert Cohn is also portrayed positively in many ways, as a very nice kid, and as a person who dealt with a lot of trauma. One of the interesting things I thought in the very beginning, when it described Robert Cohn's him taking up boxing, that he took up boxing as sort of a way to make up for his feelings of inferiority that was always thrust upon him for being different, for being a Jew, and perhaps even just for being a nice kid. It made me think I take jiu-jitsu, and I remember being bullied in my younger days. Not terribly, but bullied. And I know how empowering it is to take up a martial art, to know that you could actually beat up the bully. And so that issue was explored a little. However, Robert Cohn's ability to beat people up actually ends up biting him in the ass later on at the end of the novel. I won't spoil it in case you have not read this novel. I do recommend it, by the way, despite, if any sensitivity regarding the anti-Semitic issue or immoral behavior. I think probably when this came out in 1926, probably a lot of people were pretty shocked, particularly how much these people are drinking, how loose their relationships are. Even though a person's engaged, doesn't mean that she's not having sex with a bullfighter and another guy on the side. Life is very messy in this novel. Friendships are messy. Friendships are broken. Careers are joked about. It's not a Hallmark story. It's not a story where everyone is okay in the end. It's a story where, you know, things could have been pretty good. One of the last lines is you know, there is this. So the main character, he's in love. Don't want to spoil too much, but he's in love with the person, and she's in love with him actually. But there are some issues that keep them apart, and in some ways it is sort of a tragedy, because I don't want to spoil too much, but the love has so many issues stopping these two people from uniting, both from within just the two of them, some of their issues that they have together, as well as other people, extraneous characters on the outside. There is also a little funny quip about Polish people that you might find a little derogatory. At one point in the early part of the novel, the main character takes up a Polish prostitute, I believe. She's referred to as a harlot, and he thought it would be fun to have dinner with her, and then he quickly says, "Man, I forgot how boring it was to talk to Poles." So there's, you know, when you're reading old novels that are written 100 years ago, you're going to come across values that we see as not very progressive. But I recommend it nonetheless. The references to the temperance movement and some of, you know, prohibition, and the juxtaposition between what was going on in America at that time with the heavy drinking. If you are a person who likes alcohol, there's a lot of mention of different cocktails. At one point they go fishing. I mean, there's a lot going on. I should say that if you have never read a Hemingway novel, you will be in, either you will, I think you'll be in for a treat. For me, Hemingway is very different than some of my other favorite writers. If you are familiar, then this will not come as a surprise to you, but Hemingway is a writer who he doesn't like to write really long, flowery sentences describing everything in detail. He likes to leave many things sort of implied within very brief sentences. In his theory of writing, which he referred to as the iceberg style of writing, or the iceberg theory. Once again, I'm not a Hemingway expert, so forgive me or correct me in the comments, but Hemingway's philosophy of writing was like an iceberg. When you see an iceberg floating in the sea and you only see a small top, but small top of it going above the waves, above the waters, but you know deep down below there is this massive mountain of ice, and you get a feeling, you get the full feeling of the iceberg even from only seeing that small top of it above the waves, because you know what's down below the water. His style of writing, he tried to put that philosophy into his writing, or the metaphor of the iceberg into his writing, where he wouldn't write everything that people were feeling, or their motivations or their character, but you would feel these characters, you would understand their motivations, you'd understand their psychology, you'd understand what's happening from a brief description. So sort of using sort of a parsimonious handling of language, but still conveying the full meaning and description of what he's trying to convey to you as the reader. So that's sort of a long way of saying that Hemingway has a very interesting style of writing, short sentences, but you still get the full impact of a deep work of literature. So I hope I didn't spoil too much. It is a fun, fast-moving novel. I forgot to say, it does it does move from Paris and takes place largely in Pamplona, the running of the bulls, in Spain, and there's a lot of things going on at the fiesta of San Fermin. I don't exactly know, but the bullfighting takes center stage. Bullfighters come into it. You learn a lot about bullfighting in this novel. Not a lot, but you can come to appreciate a lot of things about it. And I learned a lot about it, and ended up even looking up things on Wikipedia about bullfighting, because Hemingway was able to write about it in such a way that made me interested in it as more than just this bloody spectacle. And it is bloody, and many of the characters, it is difficult for them to watch it, and some of them can't take their eyes off of it, and you can only take so much of it, and it exhausts you. There is a lot of emotion in this novel. There's a lot of fun in this novel. There's a lot of perhaps repulsion in the novel, and there's a lot of metaphors that probably are far beyond me. I mean, I read a little bit before making this video, and some people would say that the 3 martinis that he has at the bar represent this, that, and another critic thinks it represents this, that. I didn't go that deep. I just enjoyed it for what it was, and how it helped me reflect on my own life, because, and not trying to make this about me, but it reminded me of my bachelor party that I had in 2016, where a lot of us sort of went on this road trip and stayed in hotels and did a lot of drinking, and a lot of shenanigans happened, and some friendships were forged and some friendships broke up, and sort of what can happen when young people gather together and go all out, and there's a lot of intoxication and a lot of things going on, and just a sort of a cauldron of chaos. How fast and how crazy and how meaningful and how devastating life can be. So anyways, and how beautiful it can be. It is a beautiful novel. I greatly enjoyed it. Anyways, that is The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway, published in 1926, dedicated to his first wife, Hadley, who I guess I'll talk a little bit about now. I had read A Movable Feast, which was about Hemingway's life in Paris. So a lot of The Sun Also Rises is based on many of Hemingway's own experiences. He really did live in Paris. He really did go to Pamplona. He went several times with his wife, Hadley, first wife, Hadley. It did not work out between Hemingway and his first wife, Hadley. They ended up divorcing. Hemingway ended up giving all of the royalties for The Sun Also Rises, which has been in continuous print for the last 100 years. It's been a very successful novel. It's been successful the entire time, I believe, like multiple printings and whatnot. He gave all of the royalties to his first wife. I know as infidelity comes up in the novel The Sun Also Rises, Hemingway ended up being divorced, getting divorced by his first wife Hadley, for his infidelity with someone, maybe a Jewish woman. I'm not sure. Not that makes any difference, but and I know that Hemingway, I think, was always scarred from losing Hadley. I know, at least in A Movable Feast, he left me with the impression that despite having more marriages, more love affairs, and more success than most artists could ever dream of, he never really quite forgot that first wife and what happened. So it is, it's a beautiful novel, man, and it's based a lot on his life. And if any of this sounds interesting, I recommend it to you. And if you have any questions or comments, please put it down below. Thank you for watching. My name is Ryan Freeman. Bye-bye.